So I hate my job. Well, I don't hate my current job. I love my current job, but I've had a lot of jobs in the past where I thought I probably hated the job, but realized that the reasons behind that were more because of who I worked with. So as an example, early on in my career, my first role as proper manager role, an assistant manager, I'd moved halfway across the country. I knew the manager because I'd worked with him before, got on very well. But when I got there, he was quite different and didn't seem to really be there much, quite disinterested. I was left dealing with a more junior manager who was still senior to me, unfortunately. And in my first couple of days, I had text messages trying to, let's just say things that were very inappropriate, trying it on. And I found out that he was sleeping with at least one of the member of staff, if not several. And then found out that his girlfriend would regularly come into the venue as well, who was pregnant. So, it was that was a horrible experience for me as someone who would never, ever be comfortable with something like that. And as generally a quiet person as well in your first leadership role, you just want to do the right thing. You want to listen to your manager, but you want to also, I guess, have a level of authority. This manager wouldn't turn up on time, so I was left doing all the setup. I was left dealing with everything. There were a few people there that were a bit cliquey, generally not too bad, but the sort of people, again, just made you feel quite uncomfortable, especially if you're someone like me who gets a bit anxious on things. And it just felt really, really awkward. And then we had a particular night where the staff all had a get together after work, and this particular manager again got really drunk, started a fight. The next day, somehow he manages to get into the office on time. I slept in because I was there until some silly hours trying to make sure everyone was okay and everyone got home safe. And I was the one that got pulled into the office. And on top of this, I then had a conversation with the manager because my probation had been extended off the basis that I was, and I quote, miserable. And I just couldn't believe it. I was like, of all the things, like I was working my arse off, I was doing everything I had been told to do. I'd been given no training, no real support. And I'd never done this before. I didn't know how to do stock checks. I was having to work it out. I didn't know if there was access to HR because it was a big corporate. It was all centralised. I didn't really know what HR was back then either. And I got to a point in this meeting where first I sort of burst into tears, like I couldn't believe it. And I was getting the whole, we'd never let you go. And it's just like, well, why are you putting me through this? And everything just came out then about what had been going on with this other particular manager and how uncomfortable that had made me feel. And that obviously then had to trigger an investigation. But it just made the whole atmosphere so awkward. And I was there, I think, 7 months in that role before I applied for another internal position and moved back closer to home to take a promotion.
Wow.
And that's a whole separate story, that role for another manager, but we'll leave that for another day.
Wow, I can see why you'd really hate that job and that role. I mean, where to start? Pretty much everything is wrong with this story, right? We know Maslow's hierarchy of needs, safety is at the very bottom. And to me, there was no safety whatsoever in that environment, in that atmosphere. There were no boundaries. Clearly, this boss, this person in charge, was disrespecting personal boundaries of his employees. I mean, and the fact that you knew about this, but you weren't able to really address it because of a lack of psychological safety, you couldn't share what was really going on, what you were thinking, what you were feeling. We know that when human beings repress these things, and in my case, this is very true, it grows stronger, right? And you start to suffer. You need to speak your truth sooner or later. I can't imagine a much more toxic environment in which your voice is stifled, right? Of course, you're going to hate your job. You can't express yourself, and you certainly can't connect with people. And we know that that's fundamental for human beings, right? One of our deepest desires is to connect with others, it's to belong. How can you belong to people you can't even trust? How can you trust somebody who doesn't have boundaries and isn't respecting anybody else's boundaries? Like, that is massive. Ed, what's your experience in this space? What do you make of that kind of story?
Yeah, I'm sorry that happened, because that's not, especially for a junior person coming into starting out in their managerial career, that's just, going to knock your confidence and sort of really knock, as you say, that sort of trust you have in the systems and the infrastructure and the environment in which you're working, and it's all new. And I think that we see that often with power dynamics around what people feel they can and can't say, and that applies. So you give us quite a specific example, but actually I've seen that play out in many different corporate environments where this power dynamic issue really plays into people's confidence to speak out, because they have that fear of losing their job, that fear of being called miserable or a troublemaker or somebody who's not positive and behind the team. I know, Lisa, you've talked before about things like toxic positivity. You introduced me to that term, where you must be positive, you must be a team player, you must be sort of conducive to the working environment, or else you're identified as a bit of an anomaly. And people are really under pressure to conform to those environments because they see that as a way to succeed. And I think that when you become older or more experienced in your profession, in your career, that's when you get that ability to be really authentically yourself and say, hold on a minute, catch yourself on, I'm not having any of that. These are my boundaries. But that only comes when you've had support, coaching, nurturing, being in environments that promote healthy behaviors and so on. And actually, I've been in terrible working environments where there's been everything from nepotism to a blind eye being paid to certain things that might upset customers, or put the business into a bad light, and all the way back. So I think for me, it's about organizations having that emotional maturity to look at how we protect people from power dynamics, and I don't think we talk about that enough.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. I mean, the whole story and the whole opening out of this story is very upsetting, because I'm sure it's representative of a lot of people coming into work and taking on responsibility with a view to doing a good job, supporting the people they're responsible for. And if you're not getting treated like that yourself, then you're caught between a rock and a hard place. Because on the one hand, you've got a responsibility to support other people, but you need to go to somebody else to talk about your challenges with that. And if that person themselves is not somebody that you feel you can be vulnerable around your learning process in your job, then you really are in a very stressful situation. And if you don't deal with it, then that can create mental health problems, and that can actually impact on home life and all sorts of other things. And that vicious circle is what we need to break out of through dialogue, through being more transparent around the different ways in which what Sherry has explained here plays out in many people's lives. And of course, we haven't even touched on the fact that in this situation, Sherry is a woman, and how for women, the whole sort of sexual predatory nature of how work can really make them feel that they're either using their sexual power to their advantage, or they're getting sexually undermined or manipulated by the opposite sex in some form. And I'm sure that happens with men as well, but I think for women there's a physical difference between men and women that makes them increasingly in very vulnerable situations. It's very sad to hear these sorts of things happening, really is.
But if you're a person, I think, who finds yourself in this kind of toxic culture that's making you hate your job, I personally think it can be really interesting to do some work around what your values are, what you personally value, because it can be hard to get lost in a sea of, the negativity, the chaos. I think it's really good to come back to yourself and say, hang on, what do I really value as an individual? Is this culture aligned to that which I most value? And if it's not, it may be time to start, looking at the door and seeing what else is out there. Yeah, that'd be my take.
And I think as well, Lisa, is that do we help people work out what their values are? Because if Sherry knows her values, then she goes, oh, that's not happening here. Oh, that's not happening here. And then you've got something you can say. But if those values aren't part of the recruitment process, and we don't feel confident to ask the organisation or the person interviewing us, what are the values of this organisation and how does this show up in the way that we manage people, the way that we work together as teams, then you're on the back foot, because what people need is a job and they need money. and they don't often know how to have those conversations on the front end to protect themselves and to be able to communicate with a degree of empowerment when they do have these situations arise.
Yeah, I mean, that was 18 years ago now, that particular example. And I think the difficult thing is you talk about the recruitment process there, but I'd already worked within this company. So this was an internal transfer to a different site in a different part of the country. And I stayed with that particular company for about another year because it wasn't a great company. But it's nice, I guess, that we have come a long way in terms of being more open and talking a bit more about psychological safety and inclusion and just being able to express ourselves, but there's still such a long way to go. So, you know, I really hope that that's something that we can start to support people with as Mocha and as part of our leadership program as well.
Brilliant.
Thanks, folks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.